What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. This is the podcast where you can hear the real stories behind the people on social media. I'm your host, Jacob Kelly. And before we jump into today's conversation with Nik Sharma, there's a couple things that we need to go over first. Number one, if you enjoyed today's podcast, please consider leaving a rating and a review. The more positive ratings and reviews you get, the more it helps new people find the show and really helps to grow the community that we're developing here. And if you're one of those people that have recently found the podcast, welcome. I'm very excited to have you here. Make sure you subscribe and stay tuned for future episodes. And to everybody listening, make sure you screenshot this, post it to your Instagram story, tag at My Social Life Podcast, and I'll feature you on the account and send you a message as well. And considering Nik doesn't have Instagram himself, make sure you post this to Twitter, tag at Mr. Sharma and at the Jacob Kelly, and I will definitely retweet that onto my personal account. Let us know that you've listened to this podcast. And now, without further ado, let's get to my conversation with Nik Sharma. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. This is the podcast where you can hear the real stories behind the people on social media. I'm your host, Jacob Kelly, and today we're joined by Nik Sharma. Also known as the DTC guy, Nik helped grow Hint Water to a reported $100 million in sales. From there, he became the head of direct-to-consumer at VaynerMedia, and now he has his own company called Sharma Brands, where he invests and advises other direct-to-consumer companies. I should also mention, he's only 23 years old. He's Forbes 30 under 30, and before all of this, while he was still in high school, he was managing social media accounts for people like Pitbull and Priyanka Chopra, and I'm very excited to have him here on the podcast today. Nik, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, man.
It's my pleasure. Where I want to start, I want to go all the way back to the beginning. I want to talk about where you first got hooked on sales and marketing. And if I'm not mistaken, it was while selling sodas in elementary school, right?
Yeah, that's right. When I was in second grade, we had the way that we started to learn learning math was by actually running a small cash register and like a small business for the class, which was selling sodas to like teachers and just other faculty at the school.
That's crazy. It's like, what about it at that time, like, made you really start to kind of get the bug for sales and marketing? Like, what about it that like hooked you?
I loved playing with the register, like always loved anything with a keyboard, and then loved money. And then the last thing was like being able to just have the lunchbox that carried the sodas and going around and like in your head kind of strategizing, oh, like I know the art teacher loves, Diet Coke. I'm going to make sure that the Diet Coke's at the front and I'm going to tell her it's cold and chilled. Like kind of all the everything in your head leading up to the sale, like strategizing how you're going to try and get that sale. That's the fun part for me.
That's awesome. It's just cool to hear how, like, even from a young age, like some of this stuff came just like so intuitively to you. And I want to kind of jump ahead a little bit to when you started to notice that you also had a knack for social media. It was when you used to make Facebook statuses just for on your personal account. They kind of went viral within your high school, right?
hmm Yeah. So in high school, the the way that I started to make friends was I basically had added like everybody that I would see in my classes or like thought I knew from high school on Facebook, and then I would just start writing like really funny statuses or just like things that I knew would get likes and comments. And then kind of it would play the algorithm and appear on more and more people's feed. And then eventually I became known as like the guy in the class who had the funny Facebook statuses. But that's how I started making friends. That was when I moved from a private high school where class size was like 16 to a public high school where the class size was like 34, 35. And so it was just, I realized that was a more efficient way to make friends.
Fair enough. And I know, so before you were managing socials for people like Pitbull and Priyanka Chopra, I know your first company, if I'm not mistaken, was called Social View, and you were trying to do marketing for like local businesses and restaurants. At what point did you realize that there was an opportunity for you to create a business leveraging your talents with social media as well as marketing and sales?
First of all, you've done your research because no one's ever asked me about social media. Um, that was created because myself and a friend of mine who was a year older than me in high school, we were really into just like learning all about like businesses and marketing. And we just like understood and saw a white space that like a lot of these local businesses, whether it's like a local pizza shop or like a bar or a store, these were mostly like businesses that were walking distance from both of our homes, in like a strip mall area or like a community area of the neighborhood. they just had no idea like how to do marketing. And so like, we would do things like work with the pizza shop and advertise like free soda if you come after school and get a slice of pizza. Do things like swap business cards between the places. So like, um, a clothing store and like a restaurant could swap spots and have offers for each other's places at the front of their, retail location. It was just like a bunch of like creative thinking and trying to bring them on to like social media. Very much like, also us trying to figure out this whole thing as we're doing it. Because we were also in like 10th grade.
Yeah, it's crazy that you're doing partnership marketing even all the way even back then. And
Yeah.
ultimately ended up you stopped social view media because you just felt like with the restaurants and stuff, like you didn't have full control, right? Like that was part of the reason why you transitioned out of that?
Yeah. Yeah, so there's just there's a lot of like brand safety issues. Also, when you're like trusting to like I don't even remember how old we were, but we were pretty young. And if you're a restaurant owner or a bar owner and you rely on people coming in, you want to have pretty strict guidelines to make sure that you don't push anything out content wise that's gonna um, lessen your crowd coming in. So, yeah, we ended up just, kinda dissolving that.
Fair enough. And then your second company after that was Click Management, but then eventually renamed Sharma Media, right?
Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, so your first client was your cousin's TV show that you it was And As Television, if I'm not mistaken, was the show that you were doing the Facebook page for?
Yep.
And it's like, what kind of content were, because I know you like as managing that Facebook page, you grew it to a decent size. Like, what kind of content were you creating? Like, were you just repurposing content from the show, or were you creating unique content for the social page? Like, what did that look like at that point in time?
It was both. So we would have, like, full episodes that would go up on YouTube, and there was, like, a week embargo between airing on TV and then going live on YouTube. But a week after, then we would go on YouTube, we would cut up the clips, and, this was when, like, it was a normal thing to like, Facebook video wasn't a thing, so we would post, like we would cut up clips by, like, whether it was interviews or segments on the show, promote those individually on Facebook with the YouTube link, and then, the other thing that, like, really grew the page was I just realized that, like, the same viewers, um, also love to see, like, motivational or inspirational messages in the morning. And so I just made it a point to like go to Unsplash, grab a photo, throw it into Photoshop, um, put an overlay on it, get like a nice font, put some text over it, and then throw it up at like 6:30 in the morning or like 5:30 in the morning. And the reason I would do it at that time is because you get the East Coast morning as well as the West Coast morning. And then I'd put like I don't know at that time probably like $20 behind the post, and it would just get shared like crazy. And because of that the page itself would start to build, and then we would kind of use that as like a lead magnet to get people in, and then we'd promote the show to that same audience.
Okay, fair enough. And then it was through there's an event with And As Television, I believe, that through a sequence of events led to you working with Pitbull and Priyanka Chopra.
Yeah, yeah, there was a show in LA, that I'd gone to, and one of the people I ended up meeting at was Priyanka's manager, and we chatted there, we chatted later that weekend. We both happened to be at the same event in San Francisco, and then from there it was silence, and then an email introduction to Pitbull's manager, where I worked with his team on a few different projects, and then yeah, just kind of like went from there.
That's crazy. So, like, what did people in your high school at that time think when you're managing social media accounts for some of these celebrities?
Well, so my this was probably happening when I was in like 11th and 12th grade. I ended up switching to a different school, which was more like one-on-one learning. So there weren't that many kids in my high school. Like a lot of them were like athletes or Olympians who basically used this type of schooling program to like get around their schedule. And I used it because I was like really unable to focus in a public school environment. And um, so like it was usually there was just a lot of downtime, which is what inspired me to like go forward with this was because I had quite a bit of time, and I didn't like to be idle. I would get like just really weird or like sad if I was idle. So I figured out this was like something fun to do, and so that's how I started doing it. But there like a lot of people definitely thought it was cool. My like close circle of friends would, they maybe they'd come to an event where there'd be, some of their favorite celebrities, or um, you know, like really there wasn't much they would get out of it other than like maybe hear a song before it comes out.
It's like, what did like you said you worked with Pitbull on a couple different projects, and I know like you helped Jay Sean market his album Neon, and you helped promote the group Magic when they launched. Like, what when you say like you when you worked on those things, like were you responsible for the posting? Were you consulting on strategy? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah, it was usually contributing to like the overall strategy, which includes like radio, label, creative, video, like all that stuff. And then mostly I was taking on the task of like actually posting stuff. So posts, creating the copy, the graphics, whatever it is, and then making sure that it's all going out on the channels on time, and then concurrently making sure that like engagement is staying high. So a lot of the times I would have like accounts just on my phone, and like during the day I would just jump on Twitter and respond to people. Um, and and then the last one is just like analytics and making sure that these accounts are growing.
Okay. And I know after high school, you ended up working at an ad tech company. So I'm curious as to why you didn't stick with the celebrity route and really push hard in that direction.
Um, I think like I realized that I'd kind of figured out like organic social to somewhat of an extent that was helpful to me, and I wanted to learn the like paid side of it as well as the data side of it. Um, I get like this weird FOMO of making sure that I know enough to cover my grounds, and I always want to be learning new things. Um, and so that's why I kind of just decided like, I understand organic social, and I know how it should be deployed or set up from a strategy standpoint, but I want to just keep learning new things and like moving forward.
And speaking of like understanding organic social and celebrity and stuff like that, why didn't you decide to take your knowledge and try and become an online celebrity yourself? I know growing up you wanted to be a celebrity. So like why didn't you pursue trying to leverage your knowledge to grow your personal brand? I know you've done that now, but not at the time, like you focused more so on learning about Facebook ads. Why was that?
I guess I just like never really thought that was a real thing growing up in an immigrant family.
Fair enough. And then I also want to ask too about the decision not to go to college. Did you, like you said, the traditional school environment wasn't for you? So was deciding not to go to college, was that an easy decision for you?
Well, no, it definitely wasn't an easy decision. It was a quite a long like discussion slash decision process. Um, but definitely weighing a lot of pros and cons. I realized ultimately in the end that for me, my route was not taking college education. Um, Not that I like encourage that for other people. I think everybody has their own path. But yeah, I mean, for me, in the context that I was in, and with the opportunities I had at hand, I decided not to go to college.
That's fair. And I want to ask you, I want to talk about an important 1 year, 9 months, and 17 days in your life. And that was when you worked for Hint Water. So I know they were a client first. When did you get absorbed and become internal?
Um, Probably like February of 2017 is when I joined full time.
Okay. And I know in the beginning it was more so like you just thought you were going to be running Facebook ads, right? But ultimately you ended up helping them with a lot of different things when you came on board.
Yeah, initially it was like supposed to just be performance marketing. Basically like figuring out it was really just like user acquisition through Facebook. And by the end of it, I built a 16-person team with everything from content, social, creative, email, um, affiliate, like just a full basically D2C like SWAT team for the company. Um, and finished out over there in 2000, end of 2018.
That's awesome. And I want to talk a little bit more about the Facebook side of things. I know you and I have spoken previously, and you mentioned how you would take product and you'd send it to different influencers. And then, if I'm not mistaken, you kind of watch how they'd react to the free product. And based on how they react and the content they create, you would then partner with them for more in depth influencer marketing campaigns. I'm curious as to how you determined in the first place who you would send free product to.
It's a good question. To be honest, there was no formula. It was a combination of like who are who are people that I, as a hint consumer, think are relevant in the space, as well as like who are people who are like either really interesting to follow because they're like, they're like a new creator who's just doing a lot of cool shit, which is like how I started following Sarah, who ended up being one of our main influencers for Hint. Um, or it was just like word of mouth, like, hey, you should meet this person. And it went about that way. Like we did partnerships with everyone from like Sarah Dici to Danny Duncan to um, like just so I'm forgetting some last names, but we did a ton. And we found that we learned new things with every partnership, whether it was because their audience and how their audience would react, or like realizing that even if a YouTube video will get like 3 million views, it might not deliver in any sales. Um, so there was a lot of cool learnings that came with it. But yeah, I mean, I was always open to working with anyone and everyone, only because, um, a lot of times these weren't like, oh, if you're a YouTube influencer, you get paid X. So if you have, 3 million followers, you get paid differently than the guy who has 100,000 followers. And every time we work out a deal, there's upside for both people, on either side. And so, with that structure, we tried to work with as many as possible.
Okay. And then, so I know what you would ultimately do is you would take the content that they would create and you'd run it as Facebook ads, but you run it from the account of the influencer because that would appear more organic and authentic, right?
hmm
And so I was curious, when it comes to that content that they're creating, would that also be posted organically, or was it just as ads?
It depends. So like for Danny Duncan, his was organic as well because it's just that's his thing. He just puts it at the end of his YouTube videos. For someone like Sarah, that one was not in her YouTube, but we just ran it. She created video exclusively for us to run on Facebook, and so we would just run it as Facebook. Um, in most cases, I would say, you know, you usually do without the organic posting because, for the purpose that I was working with influencers on, which was like more direct response and user acquisition, it's a lot more favorable price wise to just not post organically and just use the videos that they make for paid. Otherwise, you end up paying like you know you pay dramatically more because you're taking up prime real estate on a channel or an account that has millions of followers versus paying for content that you then white label.
Mm. And what's your comfort level with giving the creators creative freedom? I know you look for people that were comfortable speaking on camera, but like how much direction was coming from yourself and Hint in terms of what you wanted to see in the content that was being created?
Almost none. So we had like do's and don'ts of like, talk about these specific product attributes and how it weaves into your day, and like don't mention X, Y, and Z. But other than that, everything was done by them. I think that like good influencer creative is 100% done by influencers. It's when brands get too involved that it starts to not work or not look as good or feel as real. And the other reason I love working with influencers is because they love when they can work with a brand and they have freedom to do anything and everything they want. And for me, as like a time saving thing, I know that I can commission a piece from an influencer and just know that I'll get it back on a certain day. I don't have to worry about anything in between. So it's like it's also a time saving thing.
And I've heard in terms of influencer marketing, some people are saying that influencer marketing is over, but I know you believe the opposite and you believe it hasn't even started yet. Why?
Yeah. Well, I think two things. One, if you look at someone like Danny Duncan, he sells well over seven figures a month in shirts that just say "Virginity Rocks," and among his other merch, like that in itself is just a perfect example of organic influencers selling their own stuff. Like that stuff is not dead. Um, then you have like influencers promoting brands. I don't think that's dead at all either. I think it comes down to who are the influencers that you're choosing to work with. A lot of them just have fake stats, and B, do they even align with your brand, you know, like deeply, or is it just are you just trying to get like a paid post or you know get them to talk about something? And so that's one big thing. And then the second one is like the way that I work with influencers pretty often, which is on the paid side. I don't think many people are doing that really at all. No one was doing it when I was doing it in 2017. Very rarely will I see like companies doing it now, but that's still another great way that influencers can work with brands.
And I've heard in terms like when you work with influencers for the paid side, I've heard you say that you think that the AIDA model is almost going away and you can convert someone off the first try now. You don't have to walk them through attention, interest, desire, action. You can convert someone on the first try. So what are some ways that you do that? Is it through using these influencers or what is kind of your advice for that?
Yeah, I mean, the whole argument there is that, I don't think you need to always follow the old school model of AIDA, which is awareness, interest, desire, action, or conversion. I think a lot of times there's ways to make that journey more efficient, especially if your price point is on the lower side, then there's definitely ways to make that more efficient, right? Like if you're selling an iPhone charger, you don't need to run a top of funnel ad to generate interest and then a middle funnel ad and then a lower funnel ad. Like you can convert somebody right away, um, to buy it. But I do think influencers could play a role in it. I think it's very much dependent on the brand itself, but usually it involves some combination of like a proper creative mix that you get to test out fully. Influence can definitely be a part of that. After that, making sure your web experiences are like tight knit and buttoned down. So whether that's things like cart optimization, down to making sure that when you're typing in a phone number in your cart, you're not getting the ABC keyboard, you're just getting a numerical keyboard, all the way to making sure that you have upsells and cross sells post checkout. Um, like that's one thing. Another thing would be like having landing pages or web experiences that customers come into, whether that's like a listicle, an article, a straight up hero landing page, or like a quiz. Um, there's just a lot of things that you can do to kind of make a it's almost like bumping the consumer in the right direction, like nudging them towards the end versus running like separate campaigns to eventually get to the same goal.
Mm. And I know one of the places that you would drive people is to the advertorial content, the editorial content that you would pay for it to be promoted on different pages, whether it be Refinery 29 or things like that. And one of the ones that you noticed performed really well was just the story of the CEO. And when you were at Hint, you started working on developing the personal brand of the CEO there. Was that because is that just something you did intuitively, or was it because a reaction to seeing people resonate with her story so you could then leverage her as an individual to help bring awareness to Hint?
No, so that project of personal branding actually started well before we even tried it for acquisition, like maybe almost a year before. Um, and so that wasn't done for the purpose of that. But what we did realize was that, for the longest time, the brand was selling a product and it was selling a what. And when we brought Kara's messaging into it and her story, not only did we find that like people completely resonated with her story, and that was another way to get people in as customers, right? Like people want to buy into products or brands where they find themselves on the other side. Um, but it also resulted in people buying like the why, not just the product. So like they resonated with the same problem Kara had before developing Hint, 15 years ago or whatever. And so they would buy in knowing that like Kara went through the same exact journey, and they would buy in with the hopes of going through the same journey, and a lot of them did. And it was cool to use Kara as like a marketing engine, because we would get a ton of like personal feedback from consumers who would say that they bought the product because they saw Kara's story, and now they don't drink any diet soda anymore. It was like helping people at scale, which was awesome.
What are some, I mean, the CEO is like the natural progression in terms of like creating a homegrown influencer for the company, but what are some other ways companies can go about breeding their own influencers in-house?
Um, I think like I don't think there's necessarily like certain positions in the company that would be good influencers. I think it's just like, whoever has a knack or a desire to like create a following and leverage that in some way, like they're the right people because they understand the content. Um, but I mean, I think definitely like putting executives on as like at least thought leaders as at a minimum is definitely a smart idea. And you see it happen more and more in the D2C space, where a lot of these founders are, putting out good content on different platforms to build an audience.
And as someone who's built an audience and a following for brands and also done it for individuals with their personal brands, and you've built your own personal brand, what's the difference in growing a community between a company's brand and a person's brand?
Um, so for a company, you're focused on kind of like a few different things. You have like content pillars, and you try and like play within the different sandboxes that those pillars allow you to play in, while still being true to your company's like mission or ethos. Whereas I think like personal brands are a little easier because they're just centered around like you. So it's like if you feel like goofy one day, then your brand is goofy. If you feel like serious one day, your brand is serious. It's just kind of like whatever you feel inside. Obviously, once you get to a certain point, like you realize that um, you develop a niche or a following in kind of a certain area, where when you put out content around whatever that area or niche is, like your content does 10 times better. But that's yeah, I would say those are the differences between like personal and company brands.
Okay. And then ultimately, why did you end up leaving Hint and joining VaynerMedia?
um to be honest, like I was just trying to get out to New York for probably a year at that point. I would come out to New York for when I would work with Hint, and like New York is just a city that I fell in love with, and I really wanted to move here and spend a good amount of my 20s here. And so, and Gary also was somebody that I had like definitely watched and, followed for probably maybe like 4 or 5 years at that point. And so, when he made the offer to come out to New York and build a team around direct to consumer, I was for it.
So it wasn't necessarily a position you applied for. Like they almost like they kind of sourced you out and they asked you to come join their team.
Yeah.
How cool was that for you then as someone who 4 years prior had sent an email to Gary trying to get just an internship, and then 4 years later they're asking you to join their team?
Um, I mean, it was pretty awesome. At first, I didn't think like any of it was actually going to happen, because I was like, "There's no way this is real." But it was pretty cool for it to happen, and I'm glad that it happened. I got to meet a bunch of cool people. I was in the room with a lot of cool people. I kind of got to see like the VaynerMedia operations internally, how they work. Um, it was a really really cool experience overall.
What were some of your biggest takeaways from your time at Vayner, whether it be from Gary himself directly or just from seeing the inside of that machine and how they operate?
For me, the coolest thing was kind of seeing how the difference between like how D2C brands operate versus a lot of these Fortune 100s that are Vayner clients operate. Um, and then the other cool thing for me was just understanding how Gary and Vayner, from like a top down perspective, have built all these systems that work within Vayner, for it to be like such an efficient agency. um, they produce like some of the best work, and to be able to see the operations and the systems internally was pretty fascinating to me. It's like
And then
their secret sauce.
yeah. And ultimately, how long did you stay at Vayner for before you ended up leaving to start Sharma Brands?
So I was actually only there for about 3 to 4 months. My project was basically to come there and help build out the direct to consumer team for VaynerMedia. And once that was built out and we had some pretty awesome clients on board, um, then I decided I wanted to focus on moving back, like kind of the brand side. And so I started with, like, the first gig right out of Vayner was launching a beverage brand called Lemon Perfect in Southern California, and I think now they're a nationwide beverage brand. Um, and then after that, it was just project after project, to the point where, um, I've worked with some pretty awesome brands, from launching brands like Cha Cha Matcha or Judy or Lemon Perfect, all the way to working with big brands that have been around for a while and are crushing it, like, the Pill Club or Orgain Protein, etc.
Mhm. And I do want to talk more about Sharma Brands, but before that, I want to ask you about Stealth Mode Startup. That was your other company, right?
Stealth Mode Startup.
It was an influencer marketing agency where you would connect influencers to mobile games with around 50 million users or more. I was going to ask you about that. It's called like the Tinder for brands, was kind of like the story
Oh,
behind that.
yeah, that was a company called Viral Panda
Okay.
that I created with a buddy of mine named Yogan. And it was basically, like, it was before I went to Hint, but I had just quickly, like, realized that, I could easily get in touch with influencers, and for some reason brands wouldn't or couldn't. And so I decided, let me just get in touch with influencers and build up supply, and then go to brands and tell them that I can get them integrations with these influencers and build up demand, and then pair the two and take a commission. And so we did that, and then we also actually did Snapchat geo filters for brands and for a couple of artist tours, which was fun. So it was like a fun thing to do with Yogan. But we did some cool stuff with, like, some pretty big gaming apps out of Asia and Russia, and then all the way down to, like, doing Snapchat tour filters for, like, iHeartRadio and G and a few of those.
Okay. And when you say like you were able to easily contact influencers, was it just through cold DMs and cold emails and stuff like that?
Yeah, it was all cold emails. So it was like cold emails for the really big ones, and then it would usually lead to their manager. And then for the smaller ones, we would get in touch with like either like a management company that also managed, like, I don't know, 20 other influencers, and they would be included. Or it would be like a CAA or UTA, where we can speak with them, and then also get access to tons of others.
So what are some of you like what is your tips for cold email or cold DM?
um, be super straight to the point, provide social proof, and provide social proof, and kind of use that as like a setup, and then get straight to the point with your ask, and, like, take a swing.
Awesome. If anyone wants to see like an actual example, I'll link them to your recent tweet that you made with your D or your email to Mark Cuban. Yeah, for sure. But I want to ask you a little bit more about like D2C as an industry. I feel like as a whole, that industry has a ton of hype around it right now. And I was curious as to like why you think that is.
Well, one, I think, like, some of the most beautifully designed brands come from D2C. So I think aesthetically people gravitate towards it. And then secondly, I think because it's a industry where you could, like, essentially get you know you could get a brand launched pretty quickly and pretty efficiently. So I think it's somewhat attractive to people that there's, like, quote unquote, less work required. which makes it that's like what happened with Bitcoin and real estate and growth hacking and all this other bullshit. But eventually those people, and the people who do think it's like the easier industry, those are the ones making like Alibaba drop shipping stores, not necessarily building brands. Um, but time will weed those people out as well.
Are there any businesses where it makes no sense to go D2C?
Um, well, in many cases, things like cold chain, so like anything you have to keep frozen within the shipping process, especially if it's beverage. Somehow Daily Harvest has pulled it off, and I'm so thankful they have because I love Daily Harvest. But in most cases, shipping beverage is really tough and usually doesn't make sense. And shipping beverage that requires an ice pack is like astronomically worse.
Mhm. And I was gonna ask you, like, are you noticing that a lot of D2C brands, when they come into the industry, they try and copy different D2C brands just with so many brands and businesses jumping into the industry now? Do you starting to see a lot of seeing a lot of people try and copy one another?
Totally, it happens all the time. Um, like whether you see brands doing it or like I'm working with a brand, I'll get a message like, "Hey, did you see what Um, did you see what this company did with their checkout? We should do that. Oh, did you see their like post purchase email confirmation? We should get that exact format." And it's just like a bunch of people following other people versus actually like getting super creative with their own customer journeys or customer experiences or content.
Is this because VCs want to see returns on their investments quickly and they're just looking to see what's worked for other companies and trying to force it into the companies that they work with?
Yeah, I think it's two things. One, probably some of that. I think two, it's more of like, well, if, someone like Casper has a press bar like as the second thing on their homepage, it's probably there because they've tested it out with like a few $1 million of media dollars. Uh, and so it's probably some of that as well. But in both cases, I still think that if like if a brand does something you like, you take the concept of it, but you don't straight up copy it.
Mhm. And, like, in your opinion, do you think that a lot of D2C companies are too reliant on Facebook and Instagram ads and they need to come up with other ways to start marketing their business?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, like this is always a hot debate, but there are some brands who are like overly reliant. I think most try to find a balance between generating whether it's press or influencer awareness or what have you, and then using paid to kind of like sweep up everybody who's becoming aware of it. Um, but there definitely are some brands that like just just rely on paid. Um, and it's not necessarily a sustainable model until you get to a point where your customers pay dividends back.
I have a quote written down here and that you said, and it was a lot of people haven't leveraged email for customer acquisition. I was curious if you could go into that a little bit as to why you think people haven't leveraged email yet.
Because email's really hard. To do email like in a really good way is not easy, and it requires a ton of thinking, which then turns into a ton of copywriting, a ton of designing, a ton of development, and then a lot of analytics and like deep research in those analytics. Email is like not an easy thing to do. Some brands are really good at it. A lot of brands just kind of use it as like notifications versus um, figuring out ways to like drum up more revenue. But yeah, the net I'd say is like email is extremely tough. But that said, it's always cheaper to get a email address than to get a purchase on a website. So if you can figure out like how to use email properly and all the right flows you need in the cross sell upsell flows, the subscription, everything within it, like you can definitely make email work.
I feel like with people spending so much on ads, like how do you balance scaling up your ads, which as a result brings in more orders versus your ability to produce product at a sufficient rate, like to meet the demand of pumping all this money into ads? Does that make sense?
Yeah, from like the ops side, like actually manufacturing.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, yeah, I mean that's all like an internal debate between the marketing and the ops team. Usually they hate each other. And if they hate each other, like things are working out, like sales are going good and customers are coming in nice and heavy. Um, if they're extremely friendly with each other and they know exactly how many customer orders are coming in, then there's probably not enough happening on the marketing side.
And why are we starting to see companies like Nike pull off of Amazon? And I'm kind of alluding to the Amazon arbitrage article that you and David Perel wrote.
Well, for Nike, they I don't remember the exact history, but they've like had history with Amazon specifically. I think also Nike is just such a big company. They want all the data and they want all the transactions to come to their site. Like Nike obviously is such a big brand that if you buy a pair of Nike shoes, there's no way you're just buying that one pair of Nike shoes. You're definitely coming back to buy more Nike shoes down the road. Um, and if they have your personal information or access to, email you, then there's a good chance that they're going to try and sell you shorts and socks and shoot more shoes, t-shirts, and everything in between. And ultimately, the more data that they're able to get on you, the more convenient they can make your shopping experience.
Okay. And then because Amazon withholds all that data, right? So it's harder to make that,
Right.
to do that with Amazon. So if you're a smaller company, would you recommend still trying to leverage the distribution and the reach with Amazon, or go it your own way and try and it might harder going your own way, but then you have access to all that data, which allows you to resell and retarget and remarket your existing customers.
Well, so the way I always think about Amazon is, you're gonna like 40% of consumer searches start on Amazon, so you don't want to just neglect it. But at the same time, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. So the way I look at Amazon is like, if you look at Hint, for example, Hint probably has like 30 something flavors of water, all of which are available on the direct consumer site. And then if you go to Amazon, you can get like the top sellers. So Amazon's a great place for discovery of the brand, and maybe like you're not so heavy duty Hint drinkers. And then the people who want access to new flavors or like smash ups, which are two flavors getting combined in a drink, they'll usually end up on the Drink Hint website, where they have access to more flavors, they get special offers, they get first look at new flavors, maybe events or community things near them. There's just like a lot more advantages that come from the brand itself. But for somebody who's like, for example, a variety pack of Hint water sells for like $20 on the site. But if Amazon is selling it for $10.38, you're obviously going to go to Amazon. So you want to be there because you want to capture that, and you want to capture both the fact that you're getting a new customer for Hint as a brand overall, but also that you're capturing like wholesale revenue.
Okay. And then at some point, do D2C brands have to go retail?
They don't have to. It definitely helps, right? Like if you're like Native Deodorant's a great example of a company that was purely D2C for the first 2 years, up until its acquisition. And then, after they were doing about 20 million in sales on D2C, then they decided to push through on on retail, and now they'll do, like a million a week in just one chain of stores.
And back to when I mentioned Amazon there, I said I was alluding to an article called The Amazon Arbitrage that you and David Perel wrote. I have a couple questions based on that. And the first one being, I found somewhere that you said if you were to give your younger self advice, it would be to write more. And why is writing something that you find important?
Well, so I like writing because of the way that like I've learned to write from David, which is it's like you consume information in a very smart way and you make highlights and notes in a very convenient way. And then you kind of develop a thesis, whether it's by just being in an industry or looking and reading at things. And then your thesis is basically backed up by a lot of the stuff you wrote. So it's like you can come up with like the Amazon arbitrage idea. We came up with that thesis and then just like scoured a catalog of notes that David and I both had, and that's basically what developed that article. And so, that's why I like writing. Another reason I like writing is like, there's just not a lot of it on the internet, um, or like a lot of it probably particularly to someone's niche. So if you're like me, where you're working in consulting with brands, or if you're like a beatboxer or like whatever it is, there's probably a pretty good white space where you can jump in and just create writing. Writing also tends to reach much smarter people. So depending on the people that you're looking to, you know, either connect with or get in front of, it's a good medium for that as well.
My other question was for anyone that doesn't know, can you explain who David is, how you guys know each other, and what are some things he's taught you?
Yeah, I know David is like the smartest guy ever. Him and I connected. He followed me on Twitter a couple of years ago, maybe like maybe like 5 years ago, and we like DM back and forth. This was when he was at an agency called Cycle, which I was a big fan of, and so we talked on the phone, and then I was in New York for a work trip. We decided to get ramen together, and then that's when we first met, and then it was just history from there. I mean, we've been extremely close friends since then. We've traveled a bunch together. We learn a lot from each other. He's really good at what he does. Um, I personally get lost in just like reading on his own website, Perel.com. If you go to Perel.com and just click essays, there's some of the it's just like the coolest shit in the world you could ever think of. David basically breaks it down completely and makes it easily digestible to understand.
Mhm. And both like you and him have done a really good job of growing your personal brands. And I wanted to ask you about your Twitter. So you're over 50,000 followers on Twitter now. And I'm curious as to what are some things that you did to grow your account?
Um, Initially, a lot of it was just like replying to people. I would set up lists on Twitter. I think I had like a list for like angel investors. I'd have a list for like founders, a list for like Silicon Valley investors, a list for like tech press, and I would just jump in and respond to a lot of people. Um, I would also I used Product Hunt a ton in the early days where there was a lot of Twitter integration with that. Um, but other than that, like especially recently, it's just been putting out things that I see in my day to day, and a lot of people tend to resonate with it, being in a similar space. And so, you know, I'm always also just testing out like new, I guess, like concepts of content, and what that looks like. But for me, like Twitter is a big place where I can either put something out to get an idea validated or invalidated, and then I also use it to just connect with a bunch of people. I find Twitter to be the most efficient way for me to connect with like anybody I would want to connect with.
And like I say, you have the sizable following on Twitter, but I noticed you don't have Instagram at all. Is there a reason behind that? Is it just because, like you said, you have more success connecting people on Twitter, or what's the story behind you not having Instagram?
Yeah, the main reason is just like I've realized that if I can just eliminate distractions, then I can just get more shit done. And Instagram was one of those distractions. And so, Twitter is like very much like for me, it's very much work focused. Um, and so it's like not as distracting.
Fair enough. And can you also tell me quickly about your texting number? I know you've been doing it for a while. I think even in early 2019 you had a number. I think the number's changed since then, but when did you start really focusing on growing out your texting list, and why is it important as an individual for you to have one?
Yeah, I had a super phone number um, a few years ago, and mainly for me, I was trying to get Hint on as a brand to Superphone. And so I wanted to pilot it essentially with myself to make sure it's like not completely crazy, and make sure it was something I could get used to before rolling it out for Hint. And in the process, I just realized that it was kind of a cool thing to have, and it was an easy way for me to connect with a bunch of people who follow me on Twitter. And then I reached out to this company called Community, and they reached out and said, like, we were, trying to also expand our portfolio from just having like A-list celebrities to, more people like you as well. And so we partnered up, and I switched over from Superphone to Community, and community is awesome because I can, like, anybody who wants to text me can text me, and I can just, like, whether it's on a flight or watching TV or just in downtime, I can jump on community and just start texting people back, whether it's like actual tactical questions that people have on their business, or whether it's just like, random questions people have about anything else.
Okay. And so like how does it, again, similar question that I asked before, how does it differ for a brand? And like you said, you're trying to get hint on a texting platform. How should a brand be using a texting platform like Community or Superphone?
So I think like two ways. One is like transactionally, it's a convenience thing to be able to like buy something and get a text that your order is confirmed, or even a text of like your shipping confirmation. I think that's super convenient. And then also customer service. And then the second way would be like how someone like Judy uses it, where Judy has created this texting platform that sends you tips every week. And so if you subscribe to Judy, then you get weekly tips on safety, and right now more about the coronavirus, like how to make sure that you stay safe during these times. But essentially, like providing value or providing convenience, I think are, as long as you're doing both of those things, I think it's fair to use text as a brand.
Okay. And I know we're almost out of time here. I got two questions left I want to ask you. The first one being, I know you've raised money to support children to receive education they deserve. I believe in India. I was curious, how long have you been raising funds and sending them to India for these kids to pursue education?
Ever since I was a little kid, um, my grandpa is the chairman of the school, and so ever since I was a kid, it was always like I have to figure out how to get. I want to say it's like maybe $1,000 a year, um, to support a kid through education. And so whether it was chores, whether it was like finding things in the garage and going door to door and selling them, whether it was, whatever it was that's just always been a thing since I was super young, was being charitable.
Have you ever, I believe it was like, it's two kids in particular that you send money towards from going to school every year, right? Or is it different kids every year?
Well, just over the course of the entire thing, it's been different kids. But yeah, usually it's two kids who get supported all the way through.
Have you ever had a chance to meet any of them?
Yeah, actually, I have. It's when I went to India last time, my sister and I got to meet the kids that we've supported, and they gave us a gift, which was awesome. But it was nice to like sit with them and talk to them and see how their lives differ from ours.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. I was just curious. I can't remember where I saw that, but wanted to ask you about it. And the last question I have is so as I usually ask everyone the same standard questions. We're out of time, so I just want to ask this question quickly. Is, imagine you have a crystal ball and you can ask this crystal ball any question and you will get the answer. What is one question you'd want to know the answer to?
Can I get five more crystal balls?
I feel like that's a cop out answer.
Let's see. If I could get any question answered, um, oh, that's a good question. Honestly, I thrive in like not having certainty of things, and so like it just makes me work harder and make sure things get done. So I would say I'm comfortable not like asking.
Fair enough. I like that. But I want to thank you for taking the time to be on the podcast. Where can the people,
Yeah, thank you for having me.
my pleasure, man. Where can the people find you? Plug anything and everything you got right now.
At Mr. Sharma on Twitter, and then I send out DTC or marketing tips on my text line, and you can also text me at 917-905-2340.
Awesome. I'll make sure everything's linked in the show notes down below. And I want to thank you once again for being on this podcast. I want to thank everybody for listening. Whether you've listened the entire way through, you only listen to bits and pieces. I really appreciate you taking time to check this out. Everyone, do me a big favor. Go and follow Nik on Twitter. Make sure you text him. I'll make sure everything's linked in the show notes down below. If you'd like to follow me, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram and at the Jacob Kelly. Feel free to come and say hello. My DMs are always open. And if you'd like to follow the podcast, you can find us on Instagram at My Social Life Podcast, or on YouTube by searching up My Social Life. Thank you once again for listening, everybody. We'll talk soon.